My reign as a Jeopardy champion lasted almost 35 minutes.
This was coming, like the waiting room of the vasectomist, and I know that's not what he's called. I know there's like a fancy word, but...
If you leave, I have nothing left to live for.
The summer of 1974, in a damp campground near Amsterdam, I was joining a hippie expedition already in progress. We were 21 cheapskates planning to drive across the Soviet Union in 3 battered VW microbuses that were already crammed with moldy canvas tents and sleeping bags and all that stuff. And I was introduced to my designated tent mate, Deirdre, who was a gloomy nerd. And she asked me to help her pack up her stuff. And as she was fumbling away, I was watching this guy across, a tall, lanky guy with a mustache who was doing all the stuff we were doing, but 10 times as fast. I decided to take this trip to try to forget a failed love affair, but so far it hadn't been working very well. In London, it was stolen. I puked my way across the English Channel. Then I stupidly decided to go visit my old flame who was living in Paris with his new girlfriend. I cheered up a little bit in Amsterdam, where at that time there were dozens of psychedelic coffee houses that could sell marijuana perfectly legally. And then I accepted an invitation from a complete stranger to spend the night in his loft overlooking a canal. I hadn't expected that we were going to be spending the night in his bed together, but I figured, what the hell, it's the last real bed I'll sleep in for 6 weeks. So our caravan took off across Scandinavia, and tall, lanky Dave was driving, and we parked at a campground near Stockholm on Midsummer Night when the sun never sets, and there were revelers carousing around bonfires until dawn under a maroon sky. And the next day we boarded a ferry to Helsinki, and that 16-hour crossing contained another all-night party under the northern lights, this brilliant green that was reflected in the dark water. And tall, lanky Dave and I leaned over the railing and we watched the silent black islands gliding by. Some of them were only big enough for one pine tree. We got to the Finnish border with the USSR, and the guards there had machine guns and dogs, and they inspected our documents, and then they insisted that we take everything out of all 3 vans because they were looking for, drugs, blue jeans that would fetch a good price on the black market, Bibles, because religion was not allowed, and decadent rock and roll music. So 4 hours later, the inspection was over, and we were on our way with in-tourist guides, Russian ladies, in each of our vans to make sure that we towed the line. Now, Deirdre's lugubrious nature and camping ineptitude were getting on my nerves. And our tent leaked, and I kept looking at this lanky Dave, and I liked tall men. And he was a little bit dull, but he would have been handsome if it wasn't for his handlebar mustache. And the fact is that he could get a fire started in no time flat, and also his tent didn't leak. So for the first and only time in my life, I decided to seduce a man for material gain. So I cut him out of the herd, and pretty soon I was moving into his tent with him, and I abandoned dreary Deirdre. And he said, "Now don't fall in love with me, because this is only a summer fling." And I said, "Fine, Dave," which these days I think you would say, "Whatever." So this is what we learned about campgrounds in the Soviet Union. Only the best of them have outhouses. Just think about that. So we would pull into one of these sorry dumps, and we would disembark, and we would try to find the least filthy place we could find to put up our tents. And then our in-tourist guides would drag us off on a long, non-optional tour of all the local Lenin statues and cement factories. In Moscow, there were banners on every wall with the big fat faces of Brezhnev and Stalin and President Nixon. There were little tiny ladies sweeping the streets with brooms made out of sticks. Dave and I drank kvass, which is made out of fermented rye bread, out of vending machines on the street where there was just one communal cup. You got your kvass, you drank it, and you put your cup back for the next person that came along. And we met this guy who'd just come back from a trip to Sochi where he had partied very hard, and he'd flown back with a suitcase full of oranges, which he was able to sell on the black market for more than enough to finance his entire debauch. And if I had liked Dave any better, this would have been a very romantic trip. We rode a ski lift that rattled and shook high above microscopic sheep on a rocky plain below, and we took a photo on the famous Odessa steps, and we went to Yalta where we saw very fat men striding proudly down the beach in their tiny, tiny bathing suits. And we took a steamship across the Black Sea to Romania, and on the ship there was a swimming pool and a dance band, and so we got to Romania, and we really had to haul ass to get back to Amsterdam before our plane took off. The rest of Eastern Europe was a whirl. I don't even remember saying goodbye to Dave. Senior year started, I'd forgotten all about him. One day I get this letter postmarked Lawrence, Kansas. Well, what do you know? He's forgotten about this being a summer fling, and now he wants to marry me. But I turned him down because at that time I did not believe that Kansas was really a place. And besides, he had that mustache.
Jane Peppler, ladies and gentlemen.